Do you remember? Do you remember the first time you switched on a console, PC, Game Boy, or even a PSP? Do you remember the first game you ever played? Do you remember the best game you've ever played? The game that truly captured all corners of your imagination, a game that conveyed a story that captivated you, or a cast that you couldn't help but fall in love with, or maybe it was the people you met online and the experience and jokes you shared. As a result, this game could be seen as nothing but perfect, regardless of the many flaws it had. Because in the end it didn't matter, you still enjoyed it and your experience wasn't dampened at all by it. Even though your friends and critics point out its flaws, you didn't care because they didn't play it the way you did. Recently, the internet exploded after the release of God of War Ragnarok, and for good reason. I mean, it just recently became PlayStation's fastest selling game of all time, and I decided to give it a try. I mean, I got it on release and I played it, and boy oh boy was I blown away. And I feel like I might have to play it at least 10 more times before I'm satisfied. And I'm sure it's an exaggeration, but that's how that game made me feel. To the point that I could even go out and say that, yo, this is the most perfect game I've ever played. And at least to me, but we all know that there'll be those out there who will immediately argue with how I'm using this word and saying that this game is perfect, describing that it has flaws here and there, but at the end of the day, it's just an opinion, my opinion. And I know this game isn't perfect, from the repetitive side quests right down to the fact that the game kind of feels easy when it comes to puzzles because they can easily get solved for me. I know that this game is flawed, and I still love this game, and I would take this game the same way without any care because I don't care. This game set out to do what it needed to do and accomplish everything it wanted to accomplish. And if I could go back in time and buy this game for the exact same price, knowing what I know about the game now, I would still do it. I can't remember the last time I felt this way about a game, and I wish I could point out one thing about this game that makes me love it, but there's so many. The lives of two individuals, both being father and son, forcing you to reminisce the days gone by of your relationship with your parents, and even though they didn't have God-killing past, they had one and did everything in their power to prevent you from reliving it, while constantly conflicting with the reality that you are you and your future doesn't lie in their past, while blaming all this in a fantasy mythological world, free of loss, and yet managing to turn all this into a captivating story. There's so much going on in this game that made it go beyond dissecting story, graphics, level design, characters, music. I finished the game having the feeling that I had just lost a friend who I'd known all my life, reigniting the love I have, or at least had, for gaming and start this channel. And I don't know how I'm still expected to try and rate this from 1 to 10 when this game is a beautiful work of art and no amount of boring repeatable missions will take that away from me. I understand not everyone will share the same feelings as me for this game. One being they got caught up in the hype and never got to experience it for themselves, or two, it just never resonated with them, and that's perfectly fine. You'd have to be God in order to make content that appeals to everybody, especially a game, so why do we lie to ourselves and act as though there's just one specific formula for reviewing games? A lot of reviewers tend to use a rigid criteria, mostly comprising of story, visuals, music, and even characters as the absolute in what makes a game good. And I strongly disagree with that. Don't get me wrong, there's obviously a guideline on what makes a game good, but we shouldn't be forced to abide by it. There are games out there that completely shatter this logic by finding ways to wow us, even though their flaws literally glare at you. We say games need to have a great cast and combat, but yet if that were the case, we wouldn't have gotten games like Gone Home, showing us you can craft a whole story from just discovery. Another honorable mention would be Death Stranding, where you basically play as a futuristic mailman, but the story is one every gamer should experience at least once. We say story is the backbones of games, but Metal Gear Rising gave us such a basic story but an incredible combat system, and honorable mentions here would be Hollow Knight and the DMC franchise, which featured some of the most intense, fast-paced, and visually stimulating fights I've ever experienced. Uncharted gave us the larger-than-life Nathan Drake, and Days Gone gave us the human Deacon St. John, while the ending of Persona 3 broke the hearts of all its fans. So looking back at all this, what makes the game perfect? If you look at it from an unbiased perspective, you realize no game is perfect. But the moment you start calling it perfect, you immediately become biased as it's a subjective point of view. Because at the end of the day, gaming is a form of art expressing an artist's passion and how they communicate it, whether it be through story, art, music, or even combat. And my favorite games are ones where some, if not all, these techniques truly touched me. It could be anything from the consequences of actions in Mass Effect, or the near losses in Taken suddenly turned to victory, or the emotional cutscenes in the Naruto Storm series. And I know you have your own moments and experiences, which is why the best reviewers are the ones who can fundamentally speak on why certain games are amazing for them, and how it touched and appealed to them, and why it could appeal to a particular audience, rather than just rate it from 1 to 10 and subjectively call it good when they shouldn't. Because at the end of the day, opinions are personal and even subjective, so why aren't we free to embrace it? Some of my favorite games don't tick any of the boxes on what makes a good game, and yet I really enjoyed my experience with them. And lately there's been a surge of people who view games from a critical perspective, which is great and healthy, but as a result has given a rise to a community solely intent on gatekeeping and having a smarter and more in-depth way of looking at games and how it's packaged and presented, rather than just having fun. And yet these can both coexist. As a result, there is no such thing as a bad taste in games, and what makes it worse is most of the time you use this imaginary thing called taste to limit yourself, or even worse, hide your taste so it's more respectable. Because it's too common or cringe or even not recognized at all, or too easy. There's nothing wrong, even if it doesn't meet the criteria with characters, plot, music, graphics, or even if you like it for the dumbest reason ever. There's nothing wrong with finding some hype game is boring, because in most cases they are overhyped. And if you can boldly say I like this cringe and cheesy game because it's cringe and cheesy, then by all means go ahead. I hold the Dragon Ball Budokai Tenkaichi series close to my heart because it was one of the few games I was fundamentally good at as a kid amongst all my peers. No one could hold a candle to me and gave me a sense of accomplishment, no matter how small it was. And every so often a game comes that appeals to that competitive nature, even if it's absolutely meaningless. Taste is a mirror of who you are. Your fascinations were shaped by your experiences in shaping the unique person you are today. So why in the hell aren't you proud of that? Of who you are? It's not about how you can grind the game for 50 hours, nor about how difficult it is, and it should never be about how much smarter you are at it. It's about embracing that everyone is unique and different and simply having fun. I'm the guy you'll find arguing about the plot of Metal Gear Solid and then go start Mass Effect 4 by saying Miranda is the best girl in the same conversation. And funny enough for me, it's through those talks, those conversations, I've had meaningful friends. Those games are special to you because that's you, that's who you are. So why aren't you proud of that? And yeah, in summary, after a long rant, I guess all I'm trying to say is that I played a video game and it blew my mind. In fact, it was the perfect game I've ever played.
Whispers falling silently drift on.